One of the things people do to, I would say, keep us down, for lack of a better term, is they divide. They divide us one from the other. So, for example, we've talked on this show about poverty and the fact that most Americans will experience at least 1 year of poverty in their lives. A majority of Americans will. And yet somehow many people are trained to believe that poor people are the other. Similarly, we're being told now that student debt, a problem that affects more than 44 million Americans and involves $1.5 trillion in debt, that we're being told that somehow that's just a small group of privileged people. So I've been interested in both issues for a while, and our next guest has written a terrific piece for Truth Out, kind of trying to take a more global perspective of debt in general, student debt in particular, and it has the headline, "Student Debt Must Become Part of the Battle Against Poverty." It was written by Daniela Senderowicz, who is a writer, historian, and activist based part of the time in the northwestern United States, but part of the time in Australia, where she is speaking to us now very early in the morning, her time. So first of all, Daniela, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Secondly, you've written about student debt before, I believe, but what gave you the idea for this particular piece and the concept of linking these disparate, or what people think of as disparate, forms of economic suffering?
I've been speaking to so many borrowers and listening to their narratives of despair, and they're suffering. They're suffering quite a bit. And I think there's a unifying language that they're using right now, which is a language of disbelief. This notion that they can't believe this level of debt happened to them. And most of the borrowers I'm speaking to are either in default or in some type of delinquency with their student debt. And this is, of course, on top of all types of other vicissitudes in their lives, whether it's medical debt, trying to pay rent, et cetera, et cetera. But they do have this unified language of despair, but complete disbelief. And what I kept hearing from them is, this shouldn't be happening to me. I have a degree. I was supposed to enter the middle class. I wasn't supposed to be struggling. And it really fascinated me to continue to hear that language. This isn't supposed to happen to me. And it suggests to me that there's a particular lack of class consciousness amongst a very educated group of people that are really struggling out there. And I wanted to explore that idea. And that's where this is how the article developed.
Well, that's fascinating to me for a couple reasons. And I guess one of them is that whenever someone says this wasn't supposed to happen, one of my first thoughts is this is a person who was misled. If they entered into a form of debt, they were told by somebody, here's what's going to happen. It's going to be good for you. You're going to be happy. It's going to work out. You'll be okay. And instead, they're in this the situation where they're in pain, where they're frightened, where they're burdened with debt, and they're thinking this wasn't supposed to happen, right? And the second piece, which you mentioned, is that there's a class dimension to it. What I think of with that is that a lot of people have been raised to believe that somehow educated workers aren't workers, that dynamic no longer is going to apply to you once you get that degree. Does that make any sense to you?
Absolutely, absolutely. What I've noticed in the language that borrowers use is that they don't quite see themselves as part of a working class, that there's a particular rank and prestige that comes with education that gives them a sense of exceptionalism. And of course, that's part of the story that we tell our young people, our people who go to school, is that this is your ticket out of the working classes and into the middle classes, and hence you're going to do quite well once you graduate. And of course, we have such a large educational industry in this country. I think last I checked, we have over, gosh, I haven't checked in a long time. The last I checked, we had over 3,000 universities in a country our size. If you take a look at the universities that we have lots of, you could say, junk programs out there that have been developed because they're funded by the student loan industry. I was just reading the other day about really a pop-up secretarial college in the Midwest that actually qualified to receive student aid from students. And those types of industries that have developed around the student loan industry, proliferate these ideas. I mean, we need to sell to these students the idea that they're going to do well. We need them to come to our campuses. We need them to pay these preposterously high tuitions. So, there's a large industry behind it. There's a large narrative. There's, of course, all the stories about the American dream that we continue to believe about, the potential that can come out of our education. There's so many narratives that are working against students, and it's very, very hard to see students that are actually really struggling, that are so impoverished and are still using very interesting narratives about themselves. I can't tell you the number of times I've spoken to students who have said, I should have worked harder. I should have done more. Maybe there's something wrong with me. And these are people who maybe fell ill, maybe people who had to file for bankruptcy because they ended up starting families, which is another notion of having children in America today. It's so expensive. Maybe people who lost their jobs, people who lost their homes. People are still navigating this very difficult territory, and they're still self-blaming. And I found that really compelling and fascinating.
Well, and if I could just interrupt you for a second, Daniela, and again, we're talking with Daniela Senderowicz about her piece on student debt and poverty. It's striking to me because I was just reading an article about a retiree in Oklahoma who worked for the same corporation for 29 years, was 1 year away from a pension when they closed the factory, and now he's 80 years old, working in a Walmart, and saying, I have nobody but myself to blame. He uses exactly the same language that these student debt holders are using, and it suggests to me that one of the characteristics of the fragmented, non-cooperative or collaborative society we live in now, not to mention the influence of capital and profit seeking on it, is that if you've been mistreated by this economic system that has made a few people very wealthy and left many other people to struggle, it's your fault. That somehow, whether it's student debt or not being able to survive in retirement, or there are other people in that condition not being able to make ends meet despite working full time, that somehow you did something wrong. That's a great way for a system to perpetuate, an unjust system to perpetuate itself, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It certainly keeps us from going out into the streets like the yellow vests. It certainly keeps us cowering, and it's such a sophisticated system. It's so well put together that so many of us are going about our lives, seeing our own lives fall apart, but we keep going about our lives without actually going out into the streets, demanding more, asking for what we need, asking for what we want. It's surprising. And this is really why I started to talk to people. I want to see, what is your frame of mind? What is your frame of mind that's keeping you from just dropping everything and going out into the streets and demanding more? So it's a very, very successful narrative that we have here in America. We live in this very happy society. We live in this, the society of optimism. We live in a society where if you try hard enough, you can make it. We live in this society that's so individualistic. Everyone is a self-made person, and that's promoted as a healthy thing. We don't teach one another to live in community or to help one another. So, look, a lot of people are really living in that narrative. I should do better. I expect more of myself. I'm a self-made person, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned the yellow vests in France, because I think, there's a little parallel there as I think about it, a strong parallel there. The yellow vest movement, which includes elements of both right and left, but it triggered because the financially elite government of Macron decided that, saw a genuine social issue, which is the need to reduce carbon consumption, and thought, we'll put that on the back of the beleaguered majority,
Yeah.
working people, struggling people, and they'll take it. And people say, no, we're not going to take it. The few have prospered enormously. We're not the people who should be carrying this burden. And I'm wondering whether that isn't a model for how to address both poverty and student debt by just saying, look, we have to recognize that we do need educated young people, for example, to fill professional roles and just to be an educated society. Education is a value of itself, even if it doesn't make you a dentist or whatever. And that's something we need as a society. And we're not going to lay that on the backs of individual struggling people. Maybe we need, if we don't rise up like the yellow vests, and I think maybe we should, but maybe we need to recognize that these are things a society does. We don't put that on the backs of individuals.
Right, right. It's an enigma. It's an enigma how we are such a passive country. It is an enigma. I spoke to a wonderful artist from New York a couple of days ago, Jamara Wakefield. And I asked her the same question, why are we not going out into the streets? And she had a very good answer. She said, well, first of all, we're all working really hard.
Right.
We can't even miss 1 hour of work to go to a demonstration. So it's very, very hard for the average American to just drop everything and go out into the street. And the other part is we are a highly individualized a society prone to individualism, and we still believe this notion that we're all John Wayne and we're all self-made people, and we those are the problems of other people, not me. And again, you find this language even with people who have been defeated tragically by the economy. Some of the research I'm doing right now is on motherhood and debt, all kinds of debt. And what's fascinating is to find that one of the likeliest predictors that a woman will file for bankruptcy is having a baby in America. Our fertility rates are down in America right now dramatically. And it's no wonder we are presenting an unfriendly society, and yet we still continue to proliferate stories in the popular media about how this is the land of opportunity, where it seems to me that the more you start to dig, the more we start to look like a developing country, that we're leaving so many people behind. But it's the reason it's so successful is because people are so complacent. You are seeing quite a few more people participating in the discussion of what's actually happening in the United States, specifically with student debt as well. But it's very, very, very slow. It's very, very slow for people. It's a slow movement. It's a slow movement. I'm not seeing a huge amount of people throwing their arms up and saying, we're going to ask for what we want. We're going to fight for what we want. And this is actually part of poverty in America. It's not just student loan. That's this exceptional type of struggle. It's actually being a person of color in this country. That is, it's actually being a person of LGBTQ in this country. It's actually being a person who works in fast food, a caretaker, a migrant worker, an immigrant. We're all in it together. We're all actually in it together. We're all cohesively struggling, and coming together with an overarching argument of our own poverty would be very, very powerful.
Well, and I would not rule it out. I mean, I think one of the things that keeps people, it's not just that people can't take an hour off work, but those almighty FICO scores might go down if we got fired or arrested at a demonstration. But I wouldn't count the people out yet. I still, one of the great things about uprisings and mass movements is that sometimes they appear when you least expect them. So I still hold out hope. Now,
Me too. Me too.
Good. I figured. But, you know, we're going to have to go in a minute, but I know you lead by quoting, in your piece, by quoting Yanis Varoufakis, who says, debt is to capitalism that which hell is to Christianity, which I don't know theologically, I'm not a theologian, but it sounds good. Debt might be unpleasant, but absolutely essential for capitalism. Do we need to move beyond debt in this country? Do we need to break down the system of debt?
Well, it's so abstract, isn't it? We're all living
Yeah.
this abstract financialized life. And, who knows if we'll be moving beyond it because we'll be forced into it, during the next financial crisis. And yes, more than likely we do. We do live in an era where most people hardly own anything. Most of us are indebted. We're drowning in debt. And so you have to question whether that's sustainable. More than likely not. But yes, we absolutely need to say, look, I want to own something. I always joke with a friend that, sometimes people are just desperate to find a place to die, just to be buried. And we can't even own that. It's tragic. It's absolutely tragic. So yeah, absolutely. I think the bubble needs to burst, and I think we need to be more open to sharing the comments with one another. Absolutely, yeah.
Well, stick around. More shall be revealed, as the saying goes. So unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But Daniela Senderowicz, thanks for writing this great piece. I recommend to people in Truth Out, student debt must become part of the battle against poverty. And thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you so much, Richard. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.